Going to go ahead and get us started. We are just past the hour and folks are joining us. So I'm going to kick us off. It is wonderful to be here. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Competency-Based Education Network. My name is Emily Shyness. I'm the Senior Director of Skills Systems at the Competency-Based Education Network. And I've been working on all things skills for some time now, and so excited for this conversation today where we're talking about what's coming next in terms of skills data and highlighting the wonderful work that our organizations, CBEN, OpenEdX, and Unicon are all doing together right now, which is wonderfully exciting stuff. So before we dive into the actual content of the webinar, I just had a few quick logistical items. The first is that this meeting is being recorded and we will share out the recording for the folks who have registered for the webinar. So you'll get this recording after it. Second, we are in a regular Zoom. So you are on mute right now, and just make sure, give us a moment, make sure that you are on mute currently and that you stay on mute for the purposes of the presentation portion of this webinar. As opposed to a Q&A function that you often see, we have the regular chat open, and that's there for you to post questions. Please do post questions throughout the presentation part of this webinar. We'll be grabbing those questions throughout, and then we'll use those to inform the more Q&A and discussion portion of the webinar that's going to come at the end. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Annie to kick us off in the actual content portion of this. Again, thank you all so much for being here. Happy to get started.
Amazing. Thanks, Emily, and thanks for being such a gracious host. We're thrilled to be working with Sivan in this capacity. Hi, I'm Annie Cellini. I work for Axim Collaborative, and I'm Vice President of Partnerships for OpenEdX. And I'll just take a minute to maybe give some context for why this conversation and why Axim Collaborative is so interested in it. Axim Collaborative was formed about 5 years ago. We are a nonprofit. We are a philanthropic organization, and we were formed from the proceeds of the edX sale to 2U. And our work is very squarely focused on economic mobility and helping create pathways and prosperity for individuals all across the US. We have a particular interest in supporting the unfortunately ever increasing population of individuals with some college and no degree. As part of our work, we're also responsible for stewarding the OpenEdX platform. The OpenEdX platform is the technology platform that underpins edX itself and continues to do so, and also supports about 2,000 other organizations globally. I had the privilege of joining the organization about 18 months ago, to look at the platform, and I'm just amazed by the places that the platform is being used, very much in this upskilling and reskilling space. So while we have significant footprint in the US, organizations like Western Governors University using the platform, we're also seeing the platform being used at scale by national governments, by ministries, by corporations, who are really focused on giving individuals the skills they need in order to progress in their careers, in order to be able to make their way to job opportunities that are only available as they acquire more skills and credentials. We will get into this a little bit, but because of the way the platform is architected, we really have been working very closely with CBEN and with Unicon and with a number of partners in the ecosystem to build out what we call the skills forward functionality of the platform. So really enabling learners to and institutions to provide learners with self-paced, personalized learning pathways that get them to the skills acquisition and through to the credentials that really will make a meaningful difference in their economic mobility. And so that's why the partnership, CBEN and Unicon, have been terrific in both making sure that we're architecting in a way that is responsive to the needs in the market, and at this moment, really thinking about the impact of technology that's actually increasing the need now more than ever for the kind of reskilling. World Economic Forum suggests that upwards of 50% of the world's global population will need to reskill by 2030. That's less than 5 years away. That's significant from a change management perspective, from a data and skills perspective, and both as a nonprofit organization and as stewards of the OpenEdX platform, we're really interested in helping be part of the solution. And so it is my great pleasure to be working with Emily, with Amber, who can't be with us today, and Kate, and the whole team at Unicon in figuring out ways that we might partner as an ecosystem to provide solutions for those who we know will need to reskill and upskill, and for those organizations who have an economic imperative to drive their transformation. Um, so that is the why. Very excited about the work to be done. Emily's going to give us a quick overview, more of the dynamic that we're seeing in the ecosystem. Kate will talk a little bit about the imagination or the work that we're doing to think about what solutions might look like in this space. And we should have about 20 minutes at the end to answer your questions. So as Emily says, let's line those up. Uh, my great pleasure, Emily, to hand the mic back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Annie. So, I wanted to take a minute to just give a little bit of a context setting and an overview of what CBEN itself is seeing across the market, especially in terms of the need for skills enablement. So, CBEN, as the Competency-Based Education Network, works across all of the sectors that you see. We go wherever skills go, and we work to make trusted skills language really be the bridge that individuals can use to move between learning and work. In particular, right now, we're seeing a huge amount of interest and movement in skills, especially across governments. So, the federal government is doing much more to define what it means to have a talent marketplace, and particularly a skills-based talent marketplace. State governments are taking up that call to do a lot of the building of those talent marketplaces that's using skills as the common currency to move individuals around economies as regulated by those governments. We're seeing that need create an even more willingness to invest and a big need to get into the data and focus very deeply on what we mean when we're talking about skills to create those common skills languages. But also, it has shown us at CBEN that the most critical piece of helping these ecosystems generate and move is trust. And to say that a particular skill has trust imbued within it relies on a few things. But the thing that happens over and over again, that CBEN is seeing over and over again through the conversations that we're having, is that trust has a lot to do with the evidence of the skill. So the need we're seeing across the marketplace, and when I say across the marketplace, I mean governments, I mean institutions, education providers, employers, service providers, all of the above. That trust is created through evidence of the skill. And so as we think about this from a data perspective and the needs of data architecture and skills language, what we're really talking about is the ability to store information about a skill, including the evidence of an individual performing that skill, and to store that data by individual, creating the amount of nuance and information about skill level and proficiency needed to make a particular individual continue to be unique in these systems that we're trying to run. So that need we're seeing across the market is attracting all kinds of investment from different places, certainly from the sectors that I was also talking about before. But we're also seeing quite a bit of movement in terms of philanthropy and federal funding coming into this space. This need for skills data that is architected with the ability to store actual evidence of skills is needed, and investment is coming into that from a lot of different directions. And as Annie was talking about before, that's led us to have a much deeper collaboration between the organizations that are here in this conversation today. Um, CBEN is here to make sure that all of those skills are correctly mapped, that we understand the relationships we have to the relationships they have to each other, and that they're well defined enough so as to be useful in these ecosystems. So we're here for all the skills mapping help you might need. We also partner with our amazing folks here with Unicon and OpenEdX, not only by advancing the OpenEdX platform that Annie was talking about, and making sure that that's there with features that support all of these nuances and need for skills. And Unicon has been our partner for a long time. They're a technical partner that's there to support you anywhere that digital innovation is happening. And this is sort of squarely in their camp of thinking about how is the digital infrastructure that we're building, allowing all of this rich skills data that's being created to move around these ecosystems in a truly interoperable way so that we can envision a future that's already coming to pass where an individual human being has not only a list of skills they hold, but rich evidence of exactly which skills they hold and the ability to take that evidence to all of the opportunity providers who are interested in seeing it and know that they can trust it based on its format. So, just a little bit more about what CBEN is seeing in terms of the movement across the ecosystem and work that we're excited to be doing, not only in general, but especially with the partners that you have on this call. So, I am now going to pass it over to Kate, and she can tell you a little bit more about what's coming next.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily, for the setup, and thank you, Annie, also for helping to explain the why and the context. And hopefully, folks are starting to build a picture in their mind of this ecosystem that we all keep talking about and what the components are necessary to really facilitate the ecosystem. I'm going to put a little bit more of a point on it with a couple of slides. And I want to do this because I don't want you to have to picture this in your mind, but I do want to give a little bit of setup for where this idea, this vision has come from. And so if you can imagine the rooms that we've all been in together where we're talking about under-resourced institutions needing skills-based platforms that are turnkey, easy, that they can just work in, build curriculum in, and then deploy for their learners, as Annie described. Then in that same room, we're thinking, okay, it's good for us to have those learning environments, but we also need to have that skills data be able to be delineated clearly inside of the platform, and we need it to be able to move outside the platform in order to inform all of those downstream systems that learners need to work on their behalf. So this is like the culmination of those conversations where we're talking about what could we be doing inside of ed tech to enable platforms that allow for skills-based learning, but don't lock that data into the skills, into the learning platform itself, but purposefully design it to be mobile. And so if you could go to the next slide, what we are envisioning together, and this is an idea, we have a small team that's starting to build some things, but this is still very early on in the idea, which is why we wanted to present it in this webinar today to get feedback. We have an idea that we could take a learning environment like OpenEdX with skills features inside of that platform, and we could create what we're calling an enablement layer that would wrap that learning environment, and it would listen for skills signals. So this diagram that you have here under the trigger column shows you some of the signals that we're thinking about. You start a skill, you complete a pathway, you actually earn a credential. When those skills activities happen, this enablement layer would be listening for that data and would be able to take that data in, intelligently decorate it, and route it. And when I say intelligently decorate it, I'm describing what Emily talked about in terms of how do we build trust and evidence for the skills data. So let's say a skill is mastered inside of the OpenEdX platform. The idea is that the enablement layer would be able to call back either into OpenEdX or into an assessment system or into an ancillary ed tech product that was capturing that evidence, grab that evidence and combine that with the skills data, and then move that information downstream to systems that might want it. So a wallet or an HRIS system. The idea here is that the skills data that is in OpenEdX is powerful, but if that data doesn't move downstream, it's really just held captive inside of the learning environment. And this is something we see across learning environments today. EdTech products typically were not designed to move data. They were designed to use that data inside their own platform. So this enablement layer that we talk about it as being skills mobility infrastructure because the idea is that it's listening for those skills signals. It's actually helping to potentially translate that information. So grabbing evidence, potentially moving it into a different format in order to then move it downstream. So it's a little bit workflow engine, a little bit intelligent hub. We can go to the next slide. I have a couple of use cases here that, again, I wanted to put a little bit finer point on what we're thinking about and also give opportunity just for you all to be thinking about where are the use cases for this. And these are actually real world use cases. These are schools or initiatives that we've talked to who said, yes, this is where I need this to happen for us. So this first one, an online college that has some skills-based learning programs today. The curriculum is all tagged with the right information in order to delineate the skills, but that skills data isn't going anywhere. So when a learner finishes a skills pathway or masters a skill, essentially that data is just sitting. And this college's next step is, and I quote, to make skills and evidence data portable and visible to the larger community. So the types of use cases that we see to enable for this enablement layer to enable are things like I start a skill. Potentially the enablement layer could work on some translation to an open badges standard or to comprehensive learner record and then route that information. This person is in progress on this skill. Second, maybe skill mastery has been attempted, and there's a potential to route that information to a pacing system to say this person has started this skill, start the clock on how long it's taking, or a pathway system where we've entered a skill pathway. And last here, and these are just examples, but mastering a skill. So calling back for evidence after skill mastery, potentially translating to an employer taxonomy to make sure that that skills language matches, potentially a translation to trusted career profile, which is the TCP is the new LERs if you're following the LER world, and that translation going downstream to a system like a wallet or a longitudinal data system, or even to something, a product like Smart Resume. Next use case. I think I'll just go through this one. There's a couple others. They'll be in the deck when you get it. But the idea here is a community college building apprenticeship pathways. And the idea is that these apprenticeship pathways need to be able to communicate skill data in the flow of work. It is not enough in an apprenticeship program to wait until the end to tell somebody that they've achieved a skill. So the idea here is I'm working on my apprenticeship pathway. I've mastered a skill. There's an immediate insertion into an LER, a wallet, or the program's pathway system to say this person has made progress. In addition, maybe a verified field demo. So that's real evidence there. How do we translate? How do we listen for that, translate that, and then move it into an employer HRIS? Maybe I'm just waiting for this individual to demonstrate that work in the field. And when they do, that opens them up for other opportunities, both either in the apprenticeship or in employment. So that whole idea here is that we're moving data that is happening, being created inside of the learning environment, but we're moving it more readily as the learner is proceeding through curriculum, through a pathway, or through a program, and not just waiting until there's a final credential at the end. Now, to be clear, this could be used for final credentials. So you could have a credential and you could decide that it was time to move that, and the enablement layer could help to route that. But what we see today is there's a lack of movement in skills data as a learner is interacting inside of the learning environment. And so how can we make that more mobile in order to facilitate all of those good downstream needs that a learner has, that an employer has, that today are getting a little bit stuck because we don't have that movement of the skills data. And there are, like I said, a couple other use cases in here, credentials, there's employment placement and vocational training. and we'd love your feedback. So the idea for the mobility infrastructure is kind of shown here. This is something, like I said, we've gotten started on an architectural drawing and chartering a small team within Unicon to actually do the build. This has been after numerous conversations, both with the partners that we have here on the webinar and with people in our market, asking what would you need this kind of infrastructure to do for you. And so we have some high level use cases that we're starting to build out. But part of the reason here is for us to gather feedback as well. So we're going to transition into more of a discussion side of the webinar, and I'll hand it back to Annie to do that. But hopefully this has given you enough context to start to think about what this mobility infrastructure could actually enable for the market.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, yeah, I think one of the reasons that we are keen to build this out in a more productized way, and actually, get market feedback and not build in a vacuum, is because we are broadly looking to build a solution that is accessible to community colleges, broad access institutions, that we make sure that we are supporting learners who need this the most. And so that I think we're also mission aligned. Sometimes we don't say it out loud, but I think it's really important to say it out loud, that this is something that we certainly at Axim care about very deeply from a mission alignment perspective, but also recognize Kate and Emily, I think, share our aspirations in making sure that this is something that is as useful as possible to as many organizations as possible, because the opportunity is enormous. Yeah. So I have some questions. Welcome some familiar faces, which is lovely to see in our cohort today. If you want to ask a question, feel free to do that in the chat. Feel free to put up your hand and come off mute if you feel brave, or if you just want to say hi, that would be nice too. But I will start just to sort of get us going here. Kate, maybe with a question to you about how you think about, through the lens of institutional strategy, what types of pedagogical learner data are currently trapped? Like, what is it that we're trying to unlock here in legacy systems that we think we most need to unlock?
From my perspective, and from the early work that the research that we've done and the early conversations that we've had, the data that is trapped is that kind of in progress skills information. There are standards and approaches for things like moving credentials. I think everybody here would agree that those are a long way from being standardized and everybody using them and them being deployed consistently. But what we don't see being unlocked is that in progress skills data, that I am not waiting until a final credential to have a system act. I need my skills information, what I'm achieving, what I'm attempting to move more readily than that. And so it's really the in progress. This is why we key this off of a learning environment like OpenEdX, is that we say, this is an opportunity where skills data is being generated. And it's an opportunity for us to not only give language to the learner to say, you are doing this. This is something that you should know how to describe. But then also being in progress in these things has value as well. We looked at some of the use cases, and it doesn't have to be done always. It can come with evidence along the path. It doesn't always have to be a final terminal credential. So I'll answer that with in progress skills data.
Yeah, I think the other thing, just to be realistic, there are so many learners who start and don't complete or stop out for a while, that actually being able to capture value in what has already been accomplished is very important. And I'm going to get it wrong if I try and quote it, but there is also some evidence that learners who have an understanding of what they've accomplished and see the value in that are actually more likely to persist and more likely to end up completing their credential. That's terrific.
Annie,
Yes, Emily, jump in, please.
Yes, thank you. I was just to build on what you both are saying too. I completely agree with Kate about this notion of in progress skills information because I think there are still sort of insidious ways that we end up having systems that are defaulting to this notion of time-based learning and measurements and metrics. And though we're making great progress in trying to move away from that, and things like OpenEdX make it possible to track different metrics and be more skills based, I do think there's still some sneakiness where if we think about how we're reporting or how we think about progression and completion, that we're still in this notion of not only time-based learning but also learning that is happening sort of one step at a time. And if we can move towards a place where we're thinking about all the skills that might be in progress at a given time, we're going to be in a much better position to think about how we report the health and the outcomes of some of these programs. And we're going to be in a much better position to support learners that are in the flow of actual life and doing a lot more than one thing at a time. And even in a position like an apprentice situation or a high school student doing career and technical education, there are multiple kinds of credentials or multiple kinds of learning experiences, be they credential and employment, that are happening simultaneously. And to unstick that data from the notion of time-based, term-based, or one skill at a time is going to open up a huge aperture in terms of how we can help people actually take advantage of the skills that they're learning.
Yeah. Um, Super interesting. Now, another kind of perhaps thing that we share in common that we just sort of glossed over, but OpenEdX, open source platform, a commitment to open source. Unicon has a lot of experience working not just with OpenEdX and the community, but other open source projects as well. So we're all sort of very attuned, I think, to the importance of standards and interoperability. I think that's fairly central to all of our philosophies. I'm curious about how you each think about how this layer needs to interface with the established frameworks like Open Badges 3.0 or OneEdTech's comprehensive learner record. We talked about the LERs, the HR Open Trusted Career Profile, other standards, and not and all of the HR tech that also will need to interoperate as well. How should we be thinking about that? And maybe Emily, I'll
That's
start with you.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
a let me jump in just from the standards perspective, and would love Emily to add as well. We didn't talk in too much technical detail about what the solution is. I kind of waved my hands, and I always make this circle. There's this enablement layer. There's some AI in it. The idea absolutely is the unification of things that exist in the market today. There is no appetite here to build a new standard, to build a new thing that then people have to make sense of, other than enabling infrastructure. And I really think about that as plumbing, as moving data from here to there, potentially with some translation, but that translation is all to standards that exist. So that's translation to what are the downstream systems speaking? What are the standards that we need that data to then be in the format of so that we can connect to downstream? So very clear. Thank you, Annie, especially for the open source comments. The idea here is that this is enabling open source plumbing that moves data, and it moves data from systems that exist to systems that exist using standards that exist. It's not to invent new things, because I think we all know that the standards landscape is already too complicated, that we don't want to add more complication to that. We want to try to unify. So where this enablement layer could help us to translate data from whatever format it comes in to the standards and to the languages that employers speak or learner infrastructure speaks, that's the goal.
Yeah, again, I really fully agree. And I think the only thing I would add is that there's interoperability that we talk about, that obviously the sort of adoption and embracing of a lot of these different standards is going to increase the possibility for all of that interoperability. And then we're also talking about this notion of what aspects of this technology can and will eventually be open source. And I think that's really important when we talk about creating this opportunity. What I was talking about at the very beginning of the webinar in terms of these talent marketplaces, which the federal government is really trying to encourage through not only funding, but, policy and definition making. You could easily see a world where that would create 50 to 60 different and unique talent marketplaces across the states, territories, and tribal nations of the US. And those states are in very different positions in terms of population size, in terms of what they have to invest. And that dynamic is also true if we look at like the world of employers. We have huge employers, we have small and medium-sized employers. They're at a very different position in terms of what they can invest and the kind of technology they can plug into and pick up. So I just wanted to say that all of what we're talking about in terms of not building a new standard, but being really clear about the standards that exist and what we can make open source also increases the interoperability that's possible in the future so that small and medium-sized businesses, small and medium-sized states, small and medium-sized institutions still have an opportunity to come up to the like level of those standards by using open source tools and making that value proposition a really attractive one for them, regardless of their ultimate mission. So, just drawing a line between exactly what Kate said about the standards themselves, not creating a new one, but thinking about them as that sort of foundation. And that's true also in terms of the mission alignment that you were talking about before, Annie, in terms of
Yeah.
standards and open source technology so that we can pull more people in and think about scaling in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, terrific. And I see some questions coming in. And Sarah, it's as if you read, which I don't think you did, my question. So I'm going to actually pose this potentially to Sarah if you want to join the chat or respond, and then perhaps Kate, Emily weigh in. My question, but you can also ask us answer Sarah's if you prefer, because it's similar. How do we ensure this initiative simplifies the ecosystem and gains traction in the market rather than becoming just another standard or thing that adds to the noise in the ecosystem? So this is about, I think, broadly socialization and adoption, which I think is also inherently linked to ability to scale, which is, Emily, also what you were starting to pull on just there. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to join in the conversation or anyone else is welcome to.
Yeah, well, Emily knows where I'm coming from. So I think it's just more about the bigger picture when she's talking about these talent marketplaces in these 50 states, 50 plus states, territories, and tribal nations that are trying to build these talent marketplaces. And we are far away from making them all interoperable, but that is the goal. So, but I see the struggle and still the challenge is having the general public, aka your earners, learners, and your employers understand what this is even about and speaking their language and translating what this all means.
And can I push on that a little bit? Do you have recommendations? Do you think we need recommendations? How do you think we should be thinking about this as we are working on this initiative as
I
a
would
group
love
of
to talk further.
organizations?
I believe I'm talking to Kate tomorrow about this
Oh,
further.
good.
And I had just talked to Emily and Amber yesterday, but and I know other people on this call, but I am one of the TA leads for the CTO challenge. So the 10 states that are semifinalists that will be announced this week, we are waiting for Department of Ed to announce those, but so those will be in, that parallel of what CBEN is doing with their project as well with the states of helping them understand all these pieces. So yes, working in lockstep with everybody about understanding how everybody builds upon each other and how we all come and pool our resources to fill those gaps. Because I think a lot of the tech vendors that came out and we talked about this there's a lot of posts on LinkedIn about how everything was let's, build some tech to solve this problem. And now we're pulling back to say, okay, but we're still not solving the problem. And then at the end of the day, who are we building this for and did they ask for it? So that's where I leave my 2 cents.
Yeah.
So more
Kate
to
or
come,
Emily,
more
do
to
you want to?
come.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's very exciting. Kate or Emily, do you want to chime in on that?
I just want to, I'll reflect that I think that's a good illustration of how complicated these challenges are. They are not just tech problems and they are not just people problems and they're not just, they're multifaceted. So the talent marketplace is an interesting one for me because when I think about what data will be necessary to actually power a talent marketplace, so you can stand up the tech, to your point, Sarah, you can stand up the job scraping thing and you can stand up the wallet and you can say, all right, now we can make connections. But if you don't have data, none of that matters. And to your point, if you don't have learners and earners and employers who understand what any of that means, none of it matters. So it's having, and I sit in the tech seat, so I can say what we're trying to do is to help make that movement possible so that as the conversations come together where employers say, now I have access to data I can trust. I will stand on Emily's soapbox there. Now I have access to data that has enough information in it for me to make a decision on whether this credential even matters to me. That is something that can help us to create flywheel effect in these kinds of ecosystems because without that, again, it's just data moving around. It's a learner's, it's a checkbox list of things that a learner can do. But once we start speaking in a way that employers can actually look at that and say, I trust this information, then we've created some potential value for them to make decisions. And so when I think about the talent marketplace, I think a lot about what data is necessary to actually build that. And in that specific case, and we've had this conversation, Amber and I have had this conversation a couple times, where there might be a feature for this infrastructure that needs batch information. Batch is sometimes like a bad word, and so somebody out there cringed, I'm pretty sure. But like, what happens to all of the information that we already have that isn't in the flow of learning inside a learning environment today, but already exists? That we might need to move in order to help to populate what the talent marketplace is going to try to do. So I think there are lots of different areas where mobility infrastructure helps the talent marketplace strategy. But your point is very, very well taken. It's not just a tech problem. It's a problem where we need language and we need people convening together to agree that this information is useful to them and for whom.
Yeah, Siban has been talking so much lately about, there's a ubiquity of the word skills, but as you drill down into why a skill is there or what a skill is needed to actually do, we come back again and again to it is not just a tech problem and it is not just a people problem. It's got to be both, even down to the level of a particular skill. We never want to be in a world where we're creating a skills statement that is only machine readable or only human readable, right? We want to create uh, a skill statement that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Amazing. Thank you. And Emily, perhaps as a continuation of this, I'm going to go to
Mhm.
Blaine's question. And Blaine, feel free, if I butcher paraphrasing or if you want to reframe, please feel free to. But and I think this is actually powerfully enabled by some of the work that we've been doing with Unicon around skills forward authoring on the platform and actually how we think about experiences that are not in a traditional learning environment. But
Mhm.
Blaine asks, how do we see learner-owned skills data accelerating the adoption of competency-based apprenticeships where credentials reflect demonstrated capabilities rather than seat time? We think about that a lot in terms of courses, but I'm really interested in this apprenticeship twist on it, Blaine. Thank you. And what infrastructure is needed for employers to trust those verified skills. So this comes, Emily, to your point about trust and the absolutely how this all hinges on that. Maybe we start with that question, and then Blaine, you can come in and ask your follow-up.
Yeah, so I'm far from the best person at CBEN to speak about apprenticeships in a super detailed way. Though, Blaine, we can make that happen if that's useful to you. But yes, I think the very notion of the like idea of apprenticeships or some of the other things we've been talking about here are that we're trying to focus in on actual trusted information about the skills themselves and about the learning, and not about the proxies that we've used in the past or that are often still used that are just trying to get at really this like rich skills information. Things like seat time, even things like, course descriptions are essentially proxies to try and get at exactly what does a given individual know and is able to do. So any of these systems that we're talking about, including the specific use case that was talking about and what Unicon is trying to build, are trying to make that skills data clearer, more interoperable, and more trusted so that the notion of we can be much more agnostic about where that learning happened or how that skill was built because we have the like root and fundamental information about what that skill looks like in that individual at this point in time. It makes any of these systems much more able to handle, ingest, and manage things like competency-based apprenticeships, competency-based education in general, apprenticeships in general, and also the sort of movement between different ways of learning and places where learning happens. So just at a broad scale, there's sort of a like benign effect of working on skills data in this way that also enables us to take skills data from a lot more places and from a lot more contexts. And that's sort of how I would think about like the larger question you were asking, Blaine. But I don't know if you want to, I don't know if Kate wants to add anything to that, but I also don't, if you want to come off mute and uh, talk a little bit more about your follow-up as well.
Yeah, Blaine, I see your video, so if you want to come
Yeah.
off mute, feel
No,
free.
I appreciate you guys indulging me a little bit, but I've been working in this for quite some time, in particular in California around career technical education and workforce development. We are lucky to be heavily invested in things like employer engagement and apprenticeship for quite some time now. And so we are in particular in and around career technical education training apprenticeship. I see that there are verified skills employers at the table that are basically co-designing this curriculum with faculty and with institutions saying this is what we need. Seeing that come out more now with apprenticeship getting a lot of traction with having an employer at the table, an education entity, and then standards are built, right, and verified with I'm working right now on a DOL grant. But I'm just wondering if there, honestly, to throw out, is there a minimal viable product with some of those standardized things, right? Like curriculum standards, DOL approved, skills that employers have verified saying this is what I need this person. And then I know the California Community College system has a pretty expansive curriculum that has to involve employers, and employers are saying, this is what I'm requiring you in the more traditional sense, as seat time to teach students. So when they graduate your program, I can hire them. So I'm wondering if there's some type of minimal viable product about, because I am a big, the data, bad data in, bad data out, right? And so that's what you're trying to protect there is that validation. So I don't know, just planting a seed, and I love that you guys are having these conversations. I've been having these conversations for quite some years, and I'm really, really excited about the Skills First initiative.
Yeah. Let me just say two very quick things, and then Kate, if you want to think about that question of minimally viable product, I think that would be wonderful. Um, the first is that um, CBEN has like an initiative that lives inside of our organization called the Project for Apprenticeship Standards and Interoperability, lovingly referred to as PAISY, that is trying to do exactly what you're talking about, Blaine, of sort of at its very basis, especially if we can focus in on skills and competencies rather than seat time, but still be, DOL compliant. Where can we actually get down to the root of like what really are the standards and how can we make sure that those standards can have movement so that any kind of employer, any kind of education provider can plug into that system. So definitely want to connect you to Paisy in general. And then the other thing I would just say is that this notion of employer engagement, not only to have a potential seat at the table in curriculum development, but that key piece of an employer validating the skills that are inside of any given credential. We're just seeing requirements for that or best practices around that expand and expand and expand. And that's true for this talent marketplace work. It's true for community college work that's doing so much of this like skill-based gen ed redesign. Employers having a seat at the table in a way that's actually sustainable over time is absolutely where like this work critically includes that and will continue as we move forward. So more to come, Blaine, but definitely the right questions to be thinking about.
Well, this is audacious conversation. I'm glad that there's, you these folks in the room, and I applaud you and look forward to seeing how I can help and how this continues. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. I'll just reflect two things to build on Emily's response. One is it's so interesting to me how this conversation about infrastructure, which I always describe as plumbing, the unsexy part of ed tech, right? It's just like we're moving things from here to there. That how often this conversation helps us to expose these are efforts that are going on in the space today that need help, that when we call it enabling an enablement layer, that's exactly what we're trying to build, is something that helps you in the work that you're doing move information more completely to help enable that ultimate goal of trusted, validated, employer skill signals for employers. Like the point is not the infrastructure. It never will be. The point will be, what are you doing and what will this infrastructure to help enable? So it's always really exciting for me every time I hear somebody go, oh, the other thing you could do with that is this. And then there's a whole new use case about something that this could enable. The second observation is that like, the hard work still remains, like getting the employers on board and having those conversations and making sure that we have shared language and that remains. So it's both a technical problem. There's still a people aspect to it. We need to bring those things together. But one of the things we haven't really talked about yet is part of the reason that we wanted to put the webinar out and socialize this idea more broadly is to invite co-design partners, people, Blaine, like it sounds like you, and I know I'm looking at lots of people on this call who have efforts that they're already doing today that might be able to benefit from some more mobile skills data, and to have you raise your hand and say, I'd love to give input on use cases. I'd love to see what your design document looks like. I'd love to give feedback, or I need it. Can we build it together? Can we get it done so that people can be using it? So this is a broad invitation to those follow-up conversations of, does this fill a gap in something you're trying to do? Is this actually an enabler for something that you're trying to put forth? And how could we be part of that?
I love that. Thank you, Kate, and sign me up. Been working with large data sets in California, built the adult education data set back in the day, but I think what I don't know how many California people are on here. We were doing the passport, and I'm nervous about that, and so that's why I wanted to come to this because it's going to be in a very important conversation in California as we build that, and I think connecting to as many of these things as possible can only help us. So sign me up.
Excellent.
Terrific. I'm going to go actually back to Dan. Great to see you. We need to catch up. This notion of talent directory that came up in a conversation I was having with an employer this morning. So actually maybe take a step back. One of the partners that I work with the National Skills Development Corporation in India. One of the largest users of the OpenEdX platform, uses it at a nation scale. About 45 million learners on the platform have done a pretty amazing job in terms of mapping with employers and high demand jobs what the skills are that are going to be needed. They then offer the kinds of micro credentials and upskilling needed to get those jobs, and surface to learners what jobs they could get if they got these incremental credentials or these additional skills, and then connect them through jobs boards directly into those jobs, and are really working hard to kind of create a pretty frictionless loop that is very learner centered. But at the heart of that does require employers to be able to clearly articulate what they need, and what this talent directory needs to look like. And I seized on this because I don't hear higher ed talk about talent directories. We talk about LERs and we talk about credentials, but it's really interesting to hear on the employer side the language that they're looking for and what might need to be in place in order for them to be able to help demonstrate to learners and signal to learners what skills they need to acquire in order to be able to get jobs and roles in their companies. And I think, not to mix too many of these questions together, I think being able to demonstrate skills in the age of AI becomes really important, particularly for more entry-level jobs, and for learners to be able to demonstrate that they have these skills. So I am curious, and this wasn't one of our seeded questions, but if Emily and Kate, you have a response to sort of Dan's thought, or any of you who are joining us, around this need for employers to be more transparent around the skills that they need for the roles that they are looking to hire into.
Um, well, I certainly agree with the basic notion that employers need to be transparent about the skills they need and to think about that. I also think as the rest of the ecosystem working on this, we also need to continue to build ways that make that kind of transparency possible and efficient enough that it can move at the speed of employers and as they're moving. The ways that we've done that in the past sort of require like a time horizon and an amount of person hours that doesn't always make sense in like the world as we see it today. So that transparency is incredibly important. It's also incredibly important for employers to find a way to surface that information as it changes so quickly, and to build their own level of trust that the kind of skills that they're transparently saying are needed to do the work that's happening inside their company are the same skills that they're collecting information about and using to base hiring decisions on, as opposed to proxies that they've used in the past, or letting the letting the disconnection between an HR function and a like learning and development function perpetuate over time. So yes to the transparency, and also I think it sort of behooves all of us to make that transparency like possible to both move and create at the speed and scale of business, not only in this country, but across the countries we're trying to work at.
Agreed. And I think that employers are in for shock of what their workforces are going to look like over the next couple of decades. I think the thought that somehow if you don't tell your employees what skills they have, they won't change jobs is just a very faulty premise. And we know, I mean, there's research that says Gen Z is going to average like 17 careers over their 17 jobs over their life. That means that our workers are going to continue to expect to be mobile. And whether that's keeping that skill taxonomy so that you can move people internally in an employer, or so that you can give them upward mobility outside of the employer, I think that's just the reality of the workforce that we are starting to have and that we will continue to have with generations that expect to be moving. I've been with Unicon for 23 years. I am a terrible example of this, but I think I am not what the learner of tomorrow looks like. These are people who are going to want to be able to take those skills and abilities and do new things, whether within an organization they already work for or outside. And they're going to leave if they decide that that is what's best for them. And so, how can we be working in a healthy ecosystem to help enable people to be mobile? Maybe it takes a little bit of, you need to see the goodwill outside of your own organization, but I think that's what workers, earners are going to expect. And so enabling that is going to be important.
Yeah, terrific. Panelists, the time has flown and we are reaching the end. Was there a question that I didn't ask you that you really wish I had? Feel free to answer that as we wrap, and then maybe talk about next steps.
Well, I'd really like to hear from our audience if we have any other specific use cases that people thought of as they sat here. I see Blaine and Dr. Hyman have added in on apprenticeships. Are there other use cases that anyone is sitting there thinking, "Oh, I'm doing something in this area, and I feel like this could be an unlock for that." So if you're so inclined and could put that in chat, that would be great. You can message us after the fact, but I'd love to make sure that the audience knows there's a call to them to give us feedback on this.
Um, I don't think there's a particular question that I was like desperately hoping to get asked. But I would definitely echo Kate's words here. I'd love to hear from the audience about how this is landing for them. And I was uh I was struck when Blaine was talking about, the work in California that particularly makes him nervous. I think it would also be really useful to surface from this group if there are places where you think that like the reasoning we're talking through or like the vision we're describing, where you're worried it potentially breaks down or roadblocks that like we're not foreseeing as we continue these design conversations. So I think that would also be really good to hear about. So we don't want to have our rose-colored glasses on. We want to build for the muddy real world.
Hey, Emily, I do just have one really quick thing that just with you mentioning that just popped up, just as far as ensuring like data consistency,
Sure.
um, and how you all are thinking about that throughout this process. I know a lot of times when we're talking about, I think it was Kate, you mentioned, skills as far as apprenticeships will be updated continuously, just ensuring how that data would be consistent um, in providing that, in being interoperable at the same time. So just thinking about those and especially for apprenticeship programs, I know data and data consistency is so important.
Yeah, Kate, do you want to talk about that? Because I think flexibility is sort of a key to this aspect of it.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you have a thought?
No, no, please.
Uh, I the vision again. I made the circle. I always make the circle. The vision on the enablement layer is to make sure that we have the right language and to make sure that we are doing translation where necessary. And so I think it is very important for us to know what format does this data come in and what format does this data go out? And the idea being it may go out in many different formats and the ability to translate. So that flexibility in terms of just knowing how to connect language. But again, not just a technical problem. Sometimes it's what do you mean by these skills? Those are, and Emily described that CBEN does a lot of work in that. Like, how do we make sure that we have shared skills information, that we're meaning the same things when we say the same thing. So I think there's a technical aspect of that and then a people aspect of that to make sure that that language flexibility is built in.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We will send out a recording. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. If there are other organizations you feel we should be connected to or talking to, would also really value that. It's been a pleasure spending the last hour with you. Thank you so much.